"Grandpa, look under there. My grandson ruined his father's wedding with one sentence and one envelope." The morning of my son Danny's wedding started like something out of a fairy tale. The October sun streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Cathedral, casting rainbow patterns across the polished pews where our family and friends would gather to celebrate what everyone kept calling the perfect match. Danny, 34 and finally ready to settle down, was marrying Rebecca Martinez, a kindergarten teacher, whose patient smile and gentle nature had somehow tamed my son's restless spirit after years of failed relationships. At 68, I'd seen enough weddings to know that this one felt different, not just because it was my youngest son's big day, but because of how long it had taken him to get here. Danny had always been what my late wife Eleanor called a wandering soul, brilliant in his work as a software engineer, but never quite able to commit to anything or anyone for more than a few months at a time, until Rebecca. "She grounds him, Frank," Eleanor had whispered to me during one of our last conversations before the cancer took her 3 years ago. "That girl is going to be the making of our Danny, you mark my words." As usual, Eleanor had been right. Rebecca had brought out a side of Danny I'd rarely seen, responsible, thoughtful, eager to build a future that extended beyond his next project or paycheck. They'd been together for 2 years, engaged for 8 months, and had spent the past year planning this celebration with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that suggested they were serious about making their union last. The wedding was set to be a traditional affair at the cathedral, where Danny had been baptized 34 years ago, followed by a reception at the historic Riverside Inn. Nothing too fancy, but everything carefully chosen to reflect both families' values and the couple's hopes for their future together. I stood in the church vestibule, adjusting my tie and watching the early guests filter into the sanctuary. My older son Michael was there with his wife Lisa, their 12-year-old son Jake, my grandson, fidgeting in a suit that was clearly new and uncomfortable. My daughter Patricia had flown in from Seattle with her husband and twin daughters. Rebecca's large extended family filled the left side of the church, a warm, boisterous group of people who had welcomed Danny with the kind of immediate acceptance that had probably sealed the deal for him. "Grandpa Frank," Jake appeared at my elbow, tugging at his tie with obvious distress. "Can you help me with this thing? Mom tied it too tight and I feel like I'm being strangled." I knelt down to loosen his tie, studying his face as I worked. Jake was usually the kind of kid who could charm his way out of any situation. Quick-witted, funny, the family clown who kept everyone laughing at holiday dinners. But today he seemed different, quieter, more serious than I'd ever seen him. "There you go, buddy. Better?" "Thanks, Grandpa." But instead of running off to find his parents or his cousins, Jake lingered beside me, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, in a way that suggested he had something on his mind. "You okay, Jake? You seem a little nervous about something." "I'm fine," he said quickly, but his eyes darted away from mine. "Just, weddings are weird." "Weird how?" "All the fancy clothes and everyone pretending to be so happy and perfect when—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Never mind." "When what, buddy?" "Nothing. It's nothing." I shouldn't have said anything. I was about to press him further when the organist began playing the prelude, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. Guests were taking their seats. The wedding party was lining up in the vestibule, and Danny was emerging from the side door with his best man, looking nervous but radiant in his black tuxedo. "Jake!" Lisa called from across the vestibule. "Come sit with us, honey. The ceremony's about to start." Jake looked at me one more time, his expression troubled in a way that made my grandfather instincts tingle with concern. "Grandpa, during the ceremony, if I tell you to look at something, will you look?" "What kind of something?" "I can't explain right now, but if I tell you to look somewhere, it's really important, okay? Promise me you'll look." "Jake, what's—" "Promise me, Grandpa, please." There was something in his voice, a desperate urgency that I'd never heard from him before. This wasn't the voice of a 12-year-old trying to pull a prank or get attention. This was the voice of a child carrying a burden too heavy for his small shoulders. "Okay, buddy, I promise." Jake nodded and ran to join his parents, leaving me standing in the vestibule with more questions than answers and a growing sense of unease that I couldn't shake. The ceremony began beautifully. Rebecca looked radiant in her simple but elegant dress, walking down the aisle with her father while the congregation rose and the organist played Pachelbel's canon. Danny's face when he saw her was everything I'd hoped for. Pure joy and love and wonder that this remarkable woman had chosen to spend her life with him. The priest, Father O'Brien, who had known Danny since he was a child, spoke warmly about love and commitment and the sacred nature of the promises the couple was about to make. The congregation listened attentively, occasionally dabbing at their eyes during the more emotional moments of the homily. I was seated in the front pew with Michael and Lisa, Patricia and her family. Jake was next to me, unusually still and quiet for a child his age. Every few minutes, I caught him glancing at me with that same troubled expression he'd worn in the vestibule, as if he was working up the courage to do something he didn't want to do. The ceremony proceeded through the traditional liturgy, readings from scripture, the exchange of vows that Danny and Rebecca had written themselves, the blessing and exchange of rings. Everything was going exactly as planned, a perfect celebration of a love story that had taken years to unfold, but seemed destined from the beginning. It was during the lighting of the unity candle, as Danny and Rebecca stood at the altar holding their individual flames and preparing to light the larger candle together, that Jake leaned over and whispered in my ear. "Grandpa," he said, his voice so quiet I almost didn't hear him over the organ music. "Look under there." "Under where, buddy?" "Under the kneeler. The one in front of us. There's something taped underneath." I looked down at the padded kneeler in front of our pew, the one that congregants use during the parts of the service that required kneeling for prayer. It looked exactly like every other kneeler in the church. Wooden frame, burgundy padding, nothing unusual about it at all. "Jake, what are you talking about?" "Please, Grandpa, just look. Put your hand underneath and feel around. There's an envelope." The urgency in his voice was unmistakable, but so was something else. A kind of grim determination that seemed far too mature for a 12-year-old. This wasn't a child playing a game. This was a child who had made a difficult decision and was seeing it through, no matter how much it scared him. I glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then quietly slipped my hand under the kneeler. My fingers immediately encountered something that didn't belong, a manila envelope, sealed and taped to the underside of the wooden frame. "Jake," I whispered, "how did you know this was here?" "I put it there," he whispered back, his eyes fixed on the altar where his father and new stepmother were lighting their unity candle in a symbolic joining of their lives. "This morning, before anyone got here. I've been carrying it around for 3 weeks trying to figure out what to do with it. What's in it? Pictures and letters and other stuff." "What kind of pictures and letters?" Jake's face crumpled slightly, and for a moment he looked exactly like the 12-year-old he was, scared, confused, and burdened with knowledge he shouldn't have to carry. "Pictures of Dad with someone else, someone who isn't Rebecca, and letters where he's telling her he loves her and making plans to see her after the wedding." My blood went cold. "Jake, are you sure about this?" "I found them in Dad's computer 3 weeks ago. I was using it to work on a school project, and I accidentally opened the wrong folder. There were hundreds of pictures and emails, Grandpa, going back months. Dad's been seeing this other woman the whole time he's been engaged to Rebecca." The unity candle flickered to life at the altar, and the congregation murmured appreciatively at the symbolic moment. But all I could focus on was the envelope in my hand, and the devastating implications of what Jake had just told me. "Why didn't you tell your parents? Why didn't you tell me before now?" "I didn't know what to do," Jake whispered, tears starting to form in his eyes. "I kept hoping it wasn't real, or that Dad would stop seeing her, or that maybe I misunderstood what I was seeing. But then last week I heard him on the phone with her, making plans to meet her next weekend, while Rebecca thinks he's going to a business conference. Jake, I couldn't let Rebecca marry him without knowing the truth, Grandpa. She's so nice to me, and she loves Dad so much. And she doesn't know that he's lying to her every single day. It's not fair." The weight of what my 12-year-old grandson had just revealed hit me like a physical blow. Danny, my youngest son, the boy I'd raised to value honesty and integrity, was living a double life. He was standing at the altar promising to love and cherish Rebecca while maintaining a secret relationship with another woman. And Jake, with the clear moral vision that sometimes only children possess, had recognized that this deception was wrong and had taken it upon himself to expose it. "Grandpa," Jake whispered as the priest began the final prayers of the ceremony, "what are we going to do?" I looked at the envelope in my hand, then at my grandson's tear-stained face, then at the altar where Danny and Rebecca were beaming at each other in apparent bliss. In a few minutes they would be pronounced husband and wife, and everyone in this church would celebrate the beginning of what they believed was a love story. But Jake and I now knew the truth, that this marriage was beginning with a lie that would eventually destroy it. "I don't know, buddy," I whispered back, "but we have to do something." The priest was raising his hands to give the final blessing. In moments, Danny and Rebecca would be married, and the congregation would erupt in applause and celebration. The wedding party would process down the aisle, guests would throw rice, and everyone would head to the reception to toast the happy couple. Unless I stood up and stopped the ceremony right now, unless I took the envelope that Jake had hidden under the kneeler and exposed my son's betrayal in front of everyone who loved him, unless I let a 12-year-old boy's sense of justice determine the course of his father's life. "By the power vested in me by the Catholic Church and the state of Michigan," Father O'Brien was saying, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Danny, you may kiss your bride." The moment of decision was slipping away. In seconds, it would be too late to stop this wedding, without creating an even bigger disaster. I looked at Jake one more time, seeing in his eyes the same moral certainty that had driven him to hide that envelope under the kneeler, the same determination that had made him reveal its existence to me at the crucial moment. My grandson had made his choice. Now I had to make mine. The envelope in my hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and the decision I was about to make would change our family forever. But as Danny kissed Rebecca at the altar, and the congregation erupted in applause, I realized that Jake was right. Some truths are too important to hide, especially when revealing them will destroy everything you thought you knew about the people you love most. The recessional music began, and Danny and Rebecca started their triumphant walk down the aisle as husband and wife, beaming at their guests and accepting congratulations from every row. The wedding party followed behind them, bridesmaids in soft pink dresses, groomsmen in black tuxedos, flower girls scattering the last of their rose petals on the church carpet. I remained seated in the front pew, the envelope burning like a coal in my hand while Jake sat beside me, his small shoulders rigid with tension. Around us, guests were standing, clapping, laughing, taking photos of the happy couple as they made their way toward the church doors. It was everything a wedding should be, joyful, celebratory, filled with hope for the future, and I was about to destroy all of it. "Grandpa," Jake whispered urgently, "they're almost to the door. If you're going to do something, you have to do it now." I looked at the envelope, then at my grandson's face. Jake had the look of someone who had been carrying an unbearable weight for weeks and had finally found a way to set it down, even if it meant passing that weight to someone else. "Jake, are you absolutely certain about what's in here? I printed everything out myself. I saw the emails, Grandpa. I saw the pictures. Dad's been lying to everyone, including me and Mom and you. He's been lying to Rebecca every single day." The newlyweds had reached the back of the church and were posing for photos with the photographer, while guests began filing out of the pews, chatting excitedly about the beautiful ceremony and making plans for the reception. I made my decision. "Jake, stay here with your mom and dad. Don't follow me, no matter what happens, okay? What are you going to do? What you've been too young to do yourself, buddy. I'm going to tell the truth." I stood up and walked against the flow of departing guests, heading toward the back of the church, where Danny and Rebecca were surrounded by well-wishers. The envelope felt heavier with each step, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I approached the group clustered around the happy couple. "Dad!" Danny spotted me coming and broke into a huge grin. "Wasn't that perfect? Everything went exactly like we planned. Danny, I need to speak with you privately. Right now." "Dad, we're in the middle of photos. Can it wait until after the reception?" "No, son, it can't wait. Rebecca, I'm sorry, but I need to borrow Danny for just a moment." Rebecca looked confused but smiled graciously. "Of course, Frank. We have plenty of time for pictures." I guided Danny away from the crowd toward a quiet alcove near the side altar where we could talk without being overheard. He followed willingly, probably assuming I wanted to share some sentimental father-son moment before the reception began. "Dad, what's this about? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Danny, I need you to look at something." I held out the envelope, watching as his expression shifted from confusion to recognition to something that looked like terror. "Where did you get that?" "From Jake. Your 12-year-old son found it when he was using your computer for a school project. He's been carrying this burden for 3 weeks, trying to figure out what to do with it." Danny's face went white. "Dad, I can explain." "Can you? Can you explain why your son felt compelled to hide evidence of your affair under a church kneeler? Can you explain why you just stood at that altar and promised to love and honor Rebecca while you've been planning to meet another woman next weekend? You don't understand the situation. Then help me understand it, Danny. Help me understand how the son I raised could be capable of this level of deception." Danny ran his hands through his hair, destroying the careful styling that had taken an hour to perfect. "It's complicated, Dad. My relationship with Monica, it's not what you think. Monica, so she has a name. Dad, please, you have to understand. I love Rebecca, I do, but Monica and we have history. We were together for 2 years before I met Rebecca, and when she came back into my life 6 months ago, I couldn't just turn off those feelings. So you decided to maintain relationships with both of them. You decided to lie to Rebecca every single day while planning your future with her. I was going to end it with Monica after the wedding. I just needed time to figure out how to do it without hurting anyone. Without hurting anyone? Danny, you're about to hurt everyone. You've married Rebecca under false pretenses. You've made her an unknowing participant in your deception, and you've forced your 12-year-old son to become the keeper of your secrets. Jake doesn't understand what he saw. Jake understands perfectly what he saw. He understands that you've been lying to the woman who loves you. He understands that you've been betraying someone who trusts you completely. And he understands that it's wrong, even if you don't. Through the stained glass windows, I could see wedding guests gathering on the church steps for group photos. Rebecca was looking around, probably wondering where her new husband had disappeared to just moments after their ceremony ended. Dad, you can't tell Rebecca about this. Not today. It would destroy her. Danny, she's going to find out eventually. Lies this big always come to light. The question is whether she finds out from you, honestly and with time to make her own decisions about your marriage, or whether she discovers it months or years from now when the damage is even worse. But if you tell her now, you'll ruin our wedding day. You'll humiliate her in front of both our families. If I don't tell her now, I'll be complicit in the lie you've built your marriage on. Danny grabbed my arm, his grip desperate. Dad, please. I'm begging you, give me a chance to handle this my own way. Let me go on the honeymoon. Let me figure out how to end things with Monica, and then I'll tell Rebecca everything when we get back. And what about Monica? What about the plans you made to see her next weekend while Rebecca thinks you're at a business conference? Danny's eyes widened in shock. How could Jake possibly know about that? Because he heard you on the phone making those plans. Your son knows more about your affair than your wife knows about your marriage. Does that seem right to you? I could see the internal struggle playing out on Danny's face, the desire to protect his secret warring with the growing realization that his secret was already known by the people who mattered most. Dad, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to walk back out there and announce to everyone that I've been cheating on Rebecca? Do you want me to destroy both our lives in front of everyone we know? I want you to tell Rebecca the truth, privately, quietly, before you leave for your honeymoon. Give her the choice about whether to continue this marriage knowing what she's really getting into. And if she decides to leave me, then you'll face the consequences of the choices you've made. Danny, actions have consequences. You can't lie to someone for months, marry them under false pretenses, and expect there to be no price to pay when the truth comes out. But I love her, Dad. I really do love her. Then prove it. Show her the same respect you'd want if the situation were reversed. Give her the truth she deserves, even if it costs you everything. Danny was crying now, tears streaming down his face as the weight of his deception finally caught up with him. I don't know how to tell her. I don't know how to admit that I've been lying to her since the day I proposed. You start with the truth, son. You tell her about Monica. You tell her about the affair. And you tell her that you've been planning to continue it. Then you let her decide what happens next. What if she can't forgive me? Then you'll learn to live with the consequences of betraying someone who loved you enough to marry you. We stood in silence for a moment, father and son, while the sounds of celebration continued outside. I could hear laughter, car doors slamming, the photographer calling out instructions for group shots. In a few minutes, everyone would be heading to the reception, expecting to toast the happy couple and dance the night away. Dad, Danny said finally, how did Jake know to tell you? Why didn't he go to Michael or Lisa? Because Jake has been watching you his whole life, Danny. You're his hero, his role model, the man he wants to grow up to be like. Finding out that you're capable of this level of deception has been devastating for him. I never meant for him to get hurt by this, but he did get hurt. He's been carrying your secret for 3 weeks, trying to figure out how to protect Rebecca without destroying his father. Do you have any idea what that's done to a 12-year-old boy? Danny wiped his eyes with his sleeve, smearing the tears across his face. What do I do now, Dad? How do I fix this? You tell Rebecca the truth today before you leave for your honeymoon. And if she decides our marriage is over before it even begins, then at least she'll have made that decision based on truth instead of lies. Danny nodded slowly, the fight going out of him as he accepted the inevitable. Will you stay with me when I tell her, if that's what you need? What about Jake? How do I face my son after what he's been through because of my choices? Jake did what he did because he has a stronger moral compass than his father. You should be proud of him, Danny. He did the right thing, even when it was the hardest thing. I feel like I'm about to lose everything. You might, but Danny, you lost your integrity months ago when you started this affair. Everything else is just catching up. We walked back toward the main part of the church, where Rebecca was still posing for photos with the wedding party, her face radiant with happiness. She looked up when she saw Danny approaching, her smile widening as if his presence made everything in her world complete. There you are. I was wondering where you'd disappeared to. Is everything okay? Danny looked at his new wife, this woman who had just promised to love him for better or worse, and I saw something shift in his expression. The desperate scheming was gone, replaced by a kind of grim determination. Rebecca, we need to talk, privately, before we go to the reception. Talk about what? Danny, you look upset. What's wrong? There's something I need to tell you. Something that's going to change everything. Rebecca's smile faltered as she read the seriousness in Danny's face. What kind of something? Danny looked at me, then at the envelope I was still holding, then back at his wife. Something that should have told you before we got married. Something that might change how you feel about being married to me. The photographer was still snapping pictures. The wedding guests were still chatting and laughing, and the reception was still waiting to celebrate the union that was about to be tested in ways no one could have imagined. But in that moment, standing in the church where Danny had just made sacred vows to Rebecca, I felt a profound sense of relief. The truth was finally going to come out. The lies were finally going to end. And Jake, my brave 12-year-old grandson, would finally be able to stop carrying the weight of his father's deception. Whatever happened next, at least it would be based on honesty, instead of the carefully constructed fiction that had defined Danny's relationship with Rebecca from the beginning. The envelope in my hand was about to change everything. But perhaps in the long run, that was exactly what needed to happen. We found a small prayer room off the main sanctuary, a quiet space where couples sometimes went to compose themselves before or after ceremonies. Rebecca followed us in, her wedding dress rustling against the narrow doorway, her expression shifting from confusion to concern as she took in Danny's tear-stained face and my grim expression. "Danny, you're scaring me," she said, reaching for his hands. "What's going on? Frank, why do you both look like someone died?" Danny pulled his hands away from hers, a gesture so small that it might have gone unnoticed, if not for the way Rebecca's face immediately registered the rejection. "Rebecca, I need you to sit down." "I don't want to sit down. I want you to tell me what's happening. We just got married 20 minutes ago, and now you both look like the world is ending." "Maybe it is," Danny said quietly. "Maybe my world is ending anyway." I placed a chair for Rebecca, and after a moment's hesitation she sat down, smoothing her dress around her with automatic gestures while her eyes remained fixed on Danny's face. "Danny, whatever this is about, we can handle it together. We're married now. We're a team." "That's just it, Rebecca. I don't know if we are a team. I don't know if we ever were, or if I've just been pretending we were while living a completely different life." I held out the envelope to Rebecca. "Rebecca, sweetheart, what Danny is trying to tell you is that he's been having an affair for months, and Jake, his 12-year-old son, discovered it and has been carrying that knowledge for 3 weeks. Rebecca took the envelope with hands that had begun to shake. "An affair? Danny, what is Frank talking about?" "Her name is Monica," Danny said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We used to date before I met you. She came back into my life 6 months ago, and I made some terrible choices." "6 months ago?" Rebecca's voice was very quiet, very controlled. "That was right after we sent out the wedding invitations. Rebecca, I love you. I married you because I love you, but you've been sleeping with someone else." It wasn't a question. Rebecca opened the envelope and pulled out the first few photographs, her face going pale as she processed what she was seeing. "These are recent. This one has a timestamp from last week." "Rebecca, last week, Danny, while I was doing the final menu tasting for our reception, while I was writing my vows, while I was getting my wedding dress altered." She shuffled through more photos, her hands shaking more violently with each image. "You were with her. I was going to end it after the wedding." "Were you?" Rebecca pulled out a printed email and began reading aloud. "Monica, I can't wait to get through this wedding and honeymoon so we can get back to normal. 2 weeks in Italy with Rebecca is going to feel like a prison sentence, when all I want is to be with you." She looked up at Danny, tears streaming down her face. "Is that how you felt about marrying me, Danny? Like a prison sentence?" Danny sat down heavily in the chair across from her. "I wrote that when I was confused, when I was trying to figure out what I wanted." "And what did you figure out? Because according to this email from 3 days ago, you figured out that you wanted to keep seeing Monica after the wedding. You figured out that you wanted to make me your unknowing wife while she remained your willing mistress. It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." Rebecca's voice rose, echoing off the stone walls of the prayer room. "Danny, you married me this afternoon while planning to betray me tonight. You stood at that altar and promised to love and honor me while making secret plans to dishonor me with another woman. I had been standing silently by the door, but I felt compelled to speak. Rebecca, I'm so sorry you're finding out like this. I know this isn't how anyone wanted your wedding day to go. Frank, don't apologize. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." She turned back to Danny, holding up another photograph. "How long has this been going on? How long have you been lying to me?" "Since March," Danny admitted. "She reached out to me in March, said she was moving back to town and wanted to see me." "March? We got engaged in February, Danny. You've been cheating on me for our entire engagement." "Rebecca, it wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't plan for it to happen. But it did happen. Over and over again for months. You made the choice to see her, to sleep with her, to lie to me about where you were going and what you were doing." Rebecca stood up, her wedding dress making her look like an avenging angel. "You made the choice every single day for 8 months. I was confused. You were selfish. There's a difference." Rebecca walked to the small window and stared out at the parking lot where wedding guests were loading into cars, preparing to drive to the reception. "Everyone's waiting for us, aren't they? Waiting to celebrate our marriage and toast our future together. Rebecca, We don't have to tell anyone about this today. We can figure out what we want to do privately after what? After we go to our reception and pretend to be happy. After we go on our honeymoon and you spend 2 weeks in Italy wishing you were with her instead of me. After we come home and you continue your affair while I play the role of your unsuspecting wife. Danny was crying again, but it seemed to have no effect on Rebecca. I don't know what I want, Rebecca. I'm so confused about everything. Well, I'm not confused at all. I'm crystal clear about what I want. Rebecca began removing her wedding ring, sliding it off her finger with deliberate movements. I want a husband who chose me. I want a husband who was faithful to me. I want a husband who was honest with me. None of those things describe you, Danny. Rebecca, please don't do this. Not here, not today. When would be a better time? Next week, after our honeymoon, when you're back to your regular schedule of lying to me. Next month, when Monica gets tired of being your secret and decides to call me herself. Next year, when I accidentally discover what everyone else apparently already knows. No one else knows. Your 12-year-old son knows, Danny. Jake has known for 3 weeks. Do you understand what you've done to that child? Do you understand that you've made your son complicit in your deception? The mention of Jake seemed to hit Danny like a physical blow. I never meant for Jake to get involved in this, but he did get involved. He found your secret, he carried your burden, and he made the decision that his father's lies needed to be exposed. A 12-year-old boy has more integrity than his adult father. How does that feel, Danny? Danny put his head in his hands. I don't know how to fix this, Rebecca. I don't know how to make this right. You can't fix this. You can't make this right. You can't unlie to me for 8 months, and you can't unbetray me with another woman. Rebecca placed her wedding ring on the small table between them. What you can do is face the consequences of your choices. Are you leaving me? Are you ending our marriage? Our marriage ended the first time you slept with Monica. Everything that's happened since then has just been an elaborate performance where I was the only one who didn't know I was acting in a play. I stepped forward, feeling the need to intervene before this conversation spiraled completely out of control. Rebecca, you don't have to make any permanent decisions today. You're in shock, you're hurt, and you're angry. All of those feelings are completely justified, but maybe you should take some time to process this before what, Frank? Before I decide whether I can forgive my husband for 8 months of systematic deception, before I decide whether I can build a marriage with someone who sees commitment as optional. I just think that maybe, with time and counseling, Frank, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but there is no amount of time or counseling that's going to make this okay. Danny didn't make one mistake in a moment of weakness. He made hundreds of choices over 8 months. To prioritize his relationship with another woman over his relationship with me. Rebecca gathered up the photographs and letters, putting them back in the envelope with businesslike efficiency. Danny, I want you to call Monica right now and tell her that your wedding went exactly as planned. Tell her that you successfully married me without me knowing about her, and that you're ready to continue your affair just like you promised. Rebecca, I don't want to call Monica. I want to work this out with you. Call her, Danny. Right now, in front of me. Let me hear you tell her that you're ready to resume your relationship with her while keeping me as your unknowing wife. I can't do that. Why not? Because it's exactly what you were planning to do before Jake exposed your secret. Danny pulled out his phone, staring at it as if it were a foreign object. Rebecca, if I call her, if I tell her what you want me to tell her, you'll use it as proof that I can't be trusted. I already have proof that you can't be trusted. I have 8 months of proof. What I want now is for you to be honest about your intentions. Were you planning to continue your affair after our wedding, yes or no? I don't know what I was planning. Yes, you do. You were planning to keep both of us, weren't you? You were planning to have a wife for social respectability and a mistress for excitement. You were planning to live a double life indefinitely. The silence that followed was answer enough. Rebecca stood up and smoothed her wedding dress one final time. Frank, thank you for telling me the truth. And please thank Jake for having the courage to expose his father's lies, even when it meant disappointing his hero. Rebecca, where are you going? I'm going home. I'm going to change out of this dress, and then I'm going to call my parents and tell them that their daughter's marriage lasted exactly 45 minutes. What about the reception? What about all the people waiting to celebrate with us? You can go to the reception, Danny. You can tell everyone that your new wife wasn't feeling well, or that she had a family emergency, or whatever lie seems most convincing to you. After 8 months of practice, I'm sure you'll think of something. Rebecca walked toward the door, then paused and turned back one final time. Danny, I want you to understand something. This isn't happening because you fell in love with someone else. This is happening because you chose deception over honesty, because you chose selfishness over love, and because you chose to make me a fool rather than giving me the respect of the truth. She opened the door, and the sounds of the celebration outside flooded into our quiet space. Laughter, car engines, people calling out to each other about meeting at the reception. Rebecca, wait! Danny called after her. What happens now? What happens to us? She turned back one more time, and I saw something in her expression that was final and absolute. There is no us, Danny. There never really was. There was just you, lying to me about who you were and what you wanted, while I fell in love with someone who didn't actually exist. The door closed behind her, leaving Danny and me alone in the prayer room with the evidence of his betrayal scattered on the table between us. Dad, Danny said after a long moment, what have I done? You've destroyed your marriage, son. You've broken the heart of a woman who loved you completely. And you've taught your 12-year-old son that his father is capable of levels of deception he never imagined possible. Can I fix any of it? Is there any way to fix any of it? I looked at my son, this man who had just lost everything that mattered because he'd been too selfish to choose between two women and too cowardly to tell the truth. I don't know, Danny, but I do know this. If you want any chance of rebuilding your life, if you want any possibility of redemption, you need to start by being honest with yourself, with Jake, with everyone whose life you've affected with your lies. What about the reception? What am I supposed to tell everyone? You tell them the truth. You tell them that you weren't worthy of Rebecca and that she made the right choice by leaving you. Danny gathered up the photographs and letters, staring at them as if seeing them for the first time. How did I become this person, Dad? How did I become someone capable of this? I don't know, son. But the question now is, what kind of person do you want to be going forward? Outside, I could hear car doors slamming and engines starting as wedding guests began the drive to a reception that would never happen. Soon, people would start calling, asking where the bride and groom were, wondering what had happened to disrupt such a perfect wedding day. But for now, Danny and I sat in the quiet prayer room, surrounded by the wreckage of his choices, trying to figure out how to move forward when everything he thought he wanted had just walked out the door in a wedding dress. The truth had finally come out. Jake's burden had finally been lifted, and Rebecca had finally learned who she had married before it was too late to escape. It wasn't the ending anyone had planned for this wedding day, but perhaps in the long run, it was the ending that everyone deserved. The reception hall at Riverside Inn looked like a fairy tale when I arrived an hour later. White linens, crystal glasses catching the late afternoon sunlight, centerpieces of white roses, and baby's breath at every table. The wedding cake, 3 tiers of vanilla and raspberry that Rebecca had spent weeks perfecting with the baker, stood waiting on its own table, topped with a small figurine of a bride and groom that now seemed more like a mockery than a celebration. 120 guests were milling around the cocktail area, drinking champagne and asking increasingly concerned questions about where the bride and groom were. Danny hadn't shown up at all, and I'd spent the drive from the church trying to figure out how to explain to a room full of people that the marriage they'd come to celebrate had lasted less than an hour. Frank, Rebecca's mother, Carmen, rushed over to me as soon as I walked in. Thank God you're here. Where are Rebecca and Danny? People are starting to worry. I looked around the room at the faces of family and friends who had traveled from across the country to celebrate what they thought was going to be the happiest day in Danny and Rebecca's lives. Rebecca's elderly grandmother was sitting at the family table, wearing her best dress and the pearl necklace she saved for special occasions. Danny's college roommates were clustered around the bar, probably sharing stories about his bachelor days. Children were running between tables, excited to be at a grown-up party where they'd be allowed to stay up past their bedtime and eat cake. Carmen, I need to speak with you and Roberto privately. Is there somewhere we can talk? Carmen's face immediately registered alarm. Frank, you're scaring me. Has there been an accident? Are they hurt? They're not hurt. But Carmen, I need to prepare you for some very difficult news. Roberto appeared at his wife's elbow, having noticed our serious conversation. Frank, what's going on? Where's our daughter? I guided them to a small office behind the reception hall, closing the door behind us to muffle the sounds of the increasingly anxious crowd outside. Roberto, Carmen, I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but there isn't going to be a reception. Rebecca has discovered that Danny has been having an affair, and she's decided to end the marriage. The silence that followed was deafening. Carmen sank into a chair, her hand pressed to her chest as if she couldn't quite breathe. Roberto's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then a kind of protective fury that I recognized from my own reaction earlier. An affair, Carmen whispered. During their engagement, for the entire engagement, Rebecca found out about it just after the ceremony ended. She's gone home, and Danny is trying to figure out how to live with what he's done. How did she find out? Roberto asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. I thought about Jake, about my 12-year-old grandson, who had carried this burden for 3 weeks, before finally finding the courage to expose his father's deception. It doesn't matter how she found out. What matters is that she did, and she made the decision that she couldn't stay married to someone who had been deceiving her for 8 months. Carmen was crying now, quiet tears that spoke to a mother's heartbreak for her daughter. She must be devastated. Her wedding day, this was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She's strong, Carmen. Stronger than Danny deserved. She handled the news with more grace and dignity than I think I could have managed in her position. Where is she now? Roberto demanded. Where's our daughter? She went home. She said she needed to change out of her wedding dress and figure out what to do next. And Danny? Where's the son of a bitch who just destroyed my daughter on her wedding day? The venom in Roberto's voice was unmistakable, and I couldn't blame him for it. If someone had done to my daughter what Danny had done to Rebecca, I would probably be feeling the same murderous rage. Roberto, I understand your anger. If Patricia were in Rebecca's position, I'd want to kill whoever had hurt her. But right now what Rebecca needs is your support, not your revenge. What she needs is for that lying bastard to face consequences for what he's done. He is facing consequences. He's lost his wife, his reputation, and the respect of everyone who knew him. He's going to have to live with the knowledge that he destroyed the best thing in his life because he was too selfish to be faithful. Carmen looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Frank, what do we tell all these people? They came here to celebrate Rebecca and Danny's love story. How do we tell them that there was no love story, that it was all built on lies? That was the question I'd been dreading. How do you explain to a room full of wedding guests that they'd witnessed the beginning and end of a marriage in the span of an hour? How do you tell people who had bought gifts and taken time off work and traveled hundreds of miles that they'd been celebrating a lie? We tell them the truth, I said finally. We tell them that Rebecca discovered something that made it impossible for her to continue the marriage and that she's asked for privacy while she deals with this situation. They're going to want details, Roberto said. They're going to ask questions, and we'll answer the questions we can answer and deflect the ones we can't. But Carmen, Roberto, the most important thing right now is supporting Rebecca. She's going to need her family more than ever in the coming days. There was a knock on the office door, and Michael's voice came through the wood. Dad, are you in there? People are getting really worried out here. I opened the door to find not just Michael, but a small delegation of concerned wedding guests. Danny's best man, Luke, Rebecca's maid of honor, Sarah, and Patricia, who had clearly been elected spokesperson for the increasingly anxious crowd. Frank, what's going on? Patricia asked. Luke says Danny never showed up at all, and now people are talking about calling the police to make sure there wasn't an accident. I looked at this group of people who loved Danny and Rebecca, who had invested their time and emotion in celebrating what they thought was going to be a beautiful union, and I felt the weight of having to destroy their expectations. There wasn't an accident, but I need to tell everyone that there isn't going to be a reception. Danny and Rebecca have had to deal with some unexpected news, and they've asked for privacy while they sort things out. What kind of unexpected news? Luke demanded. Frank, I've been Danny's best friend for 15 years. If something's wrong, I need to know about it. Luke, it's not my place to share the details, but I will tell you this. Rebecca is safe. Danny is safe, and they're both dealing with a situation that's going to require some major changes in their lives. Patricia stepped closer, studying my face with the intensity that had made her such a successful lawyer. Frank, this isn't about unexpected news. This is about something that's ended their marriage, isn't it? I looked at my daughter, this woman who had inherited her mother's intuition and her grandfather's determination, and realized that trying to maintain the fiction wasn't going to work. Yes, I said quietly. Rebecca has discovered that Danny has been unfaithful, and she's decided that she can't stay married to him. The gasps and exclamations from the group were immediate and predictable. Luke looked like I'd hit him with a brick. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Patricia just closed her eyes and shook her head as if she'd been expecting something like this, but hoping she was wrong. Unfaithful, Luke repeated. Danny's been cheating on Rebecca for months, throughout their entire engagement. Jesus Christ, Luke whispered. I had no idea. Frank, I swear to you, I had no idea. I don't think anyone knew except Danny and the woman he was seeing. And Jake? Jake? Patricia's eyes snapped open. Jake knew about this? Jake discovered it accidentally and has been carrying the knowledge for 3 weeks. He's the one who finally made sure Rebecca found out. The implications of what I'd just said settled over the group like a heavy blanket. A 12-year-old boy had been forced to become the moral compass for the adults in his life, had been burdened with secrets that no child should have to carry. Where's Jake now? Michael asked quietly. With Lisa, trying to process what he's been through and what he had to do today. Sarah, Rebecca's maid of honor, spoke up for the first time. How is Rebecca? How is she handling this? Better than Danny deserves. She handled the situation with incredible strength and dignity. I need to go to her, Sarah said immediately. She shouldn't be alone right now. I think that's a good idea. She's going to need her friends in the coming days. Carmen stepped out of the office, her composure recovered enough to face the crowd of wedding guests. "We need to make an announcement. People have been waiting for over an hour, and they deserve to know what's happening." The next 30 minutes were among the most difficult I've ever experienced. Carmen, with Roberto and me flanking her for support, stood in front of a room full of confused and increasingly concerned wedding guests and delivered the news that Rebecca and Danny's marriage was over before it had really begun. The reactions were immediate and varied. Some guests were shocked into silence. Others burst into tears, particularly Rebecca's elderly relatives, who had been so excited to see her, finally settled down with someone who seemed to adore her. A few people demanded more details, refusing to accept that such a perfect-seeming couple could implode so suddenly. But most people, once they processed the initial shock, rallied around the need to support Rebecca and her family. Wedding guests who had never met before found themselves exchanging phone numbers and making plans to check on Rebecca in the coming days. The focus shifted from celebration to support, from joy to protective anger on Rebecca's behalf. Luke approached me as guests were beginning to leave, his face still showing the disbelief of someone whose worldview had been fundamentally challenged. "Frank, I keep thinking I must have missed something. Danny and Rebecca seemed so happy together. How could he have been living a double life for 8 months without anyone noticing?" "Because Danny got very good at lying, Luke. And because when you trust someone completely, you don't look for signs that they're betraying you." "But 8 months, Frank. How do you maintain a secret affair for 8 months? By compartmentalizing. By keeping his life with Rebecca completely separate from his life with the other woman, by getting comfortable with deception." "Who was she?" "The other woman. Someone from Danny's past. Someone he should have left in his past." Luke was quiet for a moment, staring across the reception hall at the untouched wedding cake and the decorations that had been meant to celebrate a union that no longer existed. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "What happens to Danny?" "Danny has to learn to live with the consequences of his choices. He's lost his wife, his reputation, and the respect of everyone who thought they knew him. That's going to be a heavy burden to carry. And Rebecca? Rebecca gets to start over. She gets to build a life based on truth instead of lies. In the long run, I think she's going to be fine." "What about Jake? How is a 12-year-old kid supposed to process all this?" That was the question that had been weighing on me most heavily. Jake had done something incredibly brave and incredibly difficult, but the cost of that bravery was going to be measured in his relationship with his father and his understanding of the adult world. Jake is going to need a lot of support. He's going to need to know that he did the right thing, even though it was painful for everyone involved. And he's going to need help understanding that his father's failures don't reflect on him. I found Jake later that evening, sitting in my backyard on the swing set I'd built for my grandchildren years ago. He was still wearing his wedding suit, though his tie was long gone and his shirt was untucked. He looked like what he was, a child who had been forced to carry adult burdens and make adult decisions. "Hey, buddy," I said, sitting on the swing next to him. "How are you holding up?" "I ruined Dad's wedding," he said quietly, not looking at me. "No, Jake, your dad ruined his own wedding when he decided to cheat on Rebecca. You just made sure she found out the truth. But everyone's sad now. Rebecca's crying. Dad's crying. Even you look sad. If I hadn't said anything, maybe they could have been happy. Jake, look at me." I waited until he turned to face me. Rebecca couldn't have been happy married to someone who was lying to her every single day. Maybe she would have seemed happy for a while, but eventually she would have found out the truth and it would have hurt even more then. But what if Dad really was going to stop seeing that woman after the wedding? What if he really was going to be a good husband? "Buddy, your dad had 8 months to stop seeing her and be honest with Rebecca. He chose not to do that. He chose to keep lying right up until the moment you made it impossible for him to lie anymore." Jake was quiet for a long time, pushing himself back and forth on the swing with small movements of his feet. "Grandpa, am I in trouble? Is Dad going to hate me for what I did?" The question broke my heart because it revealed the impossible position Jake had been in, torn between protecting someone he cared about and remaining loyal to his father. "Jake, you are not in trouble. What you did today was incredibly brave and incredibly right. You saw that someone was being hurt by lies, and you found a way to stop those lies from continuing. But Dad looked so sad when Rebecca left. I made Dad sad. Your dad is sad because he's finally facing the consequences of choices he made every day for 8 months. That's not your fault, buddy. That's his fault. Will things ever be normal again?" I wished I could promise him that everything would go back to the way it was, that families could survive this kind of betrayal without permanent scars. But Jake deserved honesty, especially after the courage he'd shown. "Things will be different, Jake. Your dad is going to have to earn back the trust and respect he lost today. Rebecca is going to have to figure out how to build a new life. And you're going to have to learn to live with the knowledge that sometimes doing the right thing is really, really hard." "Do you think I did the right thing?" I know you did the right thing. And Jake, I want you to remember something. When you're an adult and you're faced with difficult choices about how to treat the people you love, I hope you remember this day. I hope you remember that love means telling the truth, even when it's hard. I hope you remember that promises matter and that betraying someone who trusts you is one of the worst things you can do to another person. Jake nodded solemnly, and I could see him processing the weight of the lesson he'd learned at far too young an age. Grandpa, will you still love Dad, even after what he did? Yes, buddy. I'll always love your dad, but loving someone doesn't mean approving of everything they do. It doesn't mean protecting them from the consequences of their mistakes. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the truth about themselves. 6 months later, I attended Rebecca's small civil ceremony when she married David, a pediatric surgeon she'd met during her residency years before. It was a simple affair, just immediate family and a few close friends, held in the garden behind Carmen and Roberto's house. Jake was there, having developed a close relationship with Rebecca despite everything that had happened. She had made a point of staying in touch with him, helping him process his complicated feelings about his father and his role in exposing the truth. Danny wasn't invited, of course. Danny was still trying to rebuild his life after losing everything that had mattered to him. He'd moved to another city, taken a new job, and was supposedly in therapy, trying to understand how he'd become capable of such sustained deception. Jake and I sat together during Rebecca's second wedding ceremony, watching her exchange vows with a man who clearly adored her and had no secrets to hide. She looked radiant, not with the desperate happiness of someone trying to convince herself she was making the right choice, but with the calm confidence of someone who knew she was loved completely and honestly. Grandpa, Jake whispered during the ceremony, do you think Rebecca is really happy now? I think Rebecca is finally getting the kind of love she deserves, I whispered back. Good, Jake said firmly. She should get to be really happy. As I watched Rebecca and David kiss at the altar, sealing a marriage built on truth instead of lies, I thought about the wedding day 8 months earlier, when Jake had whispered 4 words that changed everything. Grandpa, look under there. Those 4 words had destroyed one marriage, but they had also saved Rebecca from years of deception and betrayal. They had cost Jake his relationship with his father, but they had also established him as someone with the moral courage to do the right thing, even when it was painful. Sometimes the greatest acts of love require the greatest acts of destruction. Sometimes saving someone means destroying the lie they're living in. And sometimes a 12-year-old boy has to be the one to teach the adults in his life what integrity actually means. Jake had ruined his father's wedding day, but in doing so, he had saved Rebecca's life and taught everyone who witnessed his courage that truth, no matter how painful, is always better than living a beautiful lie.